Stugotz here. Don't you wish you were at the post office right now? Teasing. Me neither. Running a business or keeping up with your schedule takes a lot, and sometimes there just aren't enough hours in the day. You've got more important things to do. Of course you do. That's why you need Stamps.com. Anything you could do at the post office, you could do at Stamps.com. I love them. Their on-demand postage means you could skip that trip to the post office. Stamps.com brings all the services of the U.S. Postal Service right to your computer. Whether you're a small office sending invoices, an online seller shipping out products, or even a warehouse sending thousands of packages a day, Stamps.com can handle it all with ease. And time isn't the only thing you'll be saving. With Stamps.com, you can get 5 cents off every first-class stamp and up to 40% off shipping rates. Right now, our listeners get a special offer that includes a 4-week trial plus free postage and a digital scale without any long-term commitment. Just go to Stamps.com, click on the microphone at the top of the home page, and type in Stu. That's Stamps.com. Click on the microphone at the top of the home page and type in Stu. That's Stamps.com. Use code Stu. The Dan Le Batard with Stugotz Show podcast is presented by Capital One. This is Banking Reimagined. ESPN Radio is presented by Progressive Insurance. Whoever's controlling the music up there in Bristol, well done. All guests on the Dan Le Batard Show appear via the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line. Domonique Foxworth going to join us there in just a minute. Here's your SportsCenter update. The Titans have agreed on a 4-year deal with Ryan Tannehill that will pay up to $118 million, $62 million of which is fully guaranteed. Patriots safety Devin McCourty agreed to a 2-year deal with the Pats worth $23 million. His twin brother Jason had his team option picked up by the team last week. And finally, a population of Falcons is called a cast. SportsCenter brought to you by Advance Auto Parts. Think ahead, think advance. At any time, 1 in 4 batteries is about to fail. Get a free battery test and free installation with any automotive battery purchase only at Advance Auto Parts. For all the latest headlines and information, tune in to SportsCenter on ESPN Radio all throughout the day.
So Stugotz says whoever's choosing the music up there in Bristol, well done. But Perfectionist Mike, who chose a weird show to be a part of as a perfectionist, was upset again about how loud the music was, ignoring that this has been a total bleep show entirely today. No one could hear you last segment, Stugotz. You were talking and we could hear you, but we were the only people who could hear you. So we're going to bring in Domonique Foxworth now. We're going to figure this out. Hopefully you enjoy the stumbling around. Usually you guys, when we give you our vulnerability, you trample it and mock it. So hopefully you are enjoying what a bleep show this has been today. And we're going to try and figure it out in the coming days. And we probably won't. So Domonique Foxworth joins us now to talk about this CBA. Help me understand it, buddy, because I don't want to read 450 pages. And I don't really understand why the vote was that close and who won and who lost. So you, as somebody who, you did this once upon a time. You were a player rep. You were the head of the players union. What did you make of what happened here? You've been arguing that the union should decertify because they shouldn't give the next 10 years to the NFL owners under this agreement. So what do you make of what the news was yesterday?
Well, I mean, I understand why we ended up where we did. I think we talked about this in the past, how the kind of power dynamics is just not fair necessarily for the owners versus the players. So we ended up here, and I don't think this deal at the end of the day was bad. They ended up in a climate where the last decade plus all the major sports have been giving back percentages of revenue to the league side. This is the first time in a decade plus that any side has been able to take some of that revenue back. The cost in this case was an extra game, and I don't think it's fair of any of us who aren't going out there to play to be able to say whether that cost is enough or too much or too little. So that's the way that I look at it. So if those guys are happy with it, then they should be happy. But the problem is it seems like at least half of them are not happy with it. And from the guys I've talked to on the executive committee and refs that I've talked to, it's not necessarily the contents of the deal that makes them mad. It's the circumstances in which they came to the deal. So many of them felt like it was kind of thrown on their lap in the last minute, and it was kind of created this air of like immediacy that wasn't necessary. So when we went through our negotiations, there was some immediacy. If we didn't sign a deal the day we did, going to miss at least 4 regular season games. And we signed that deal the summer before the season started. We're now a year and a half before the end of the expiration of the next CBA. And I think that's why so many of the players and executive committee guys were frustrated with this deal. So it's not that the deal was bad necessarily. It's just that they felt like it could have got better and they had more time to negotiate.
What specifically did you like for the players?
Well, I think the only thing you can point to be really proud of is the gain in revenue share. So they can get up to, I think, 48.8% of all revenue if the TV deals go as well as can be expected. Prior to that, it was 47%. So that's a significant amount of money. And the people who I talk to think that because of this deal and because of how big the TV deals are going to be, that the salary cap by midway through this deal is going to be up near $400 million. Right now, it's around $200 million. So that's an astronomical leap. So the deals that we're going to see, the quarterback contracts that we're going to be seeing in mid-2025 or 2026 are going to be bananas. And I think that's what you can point to and be happy about. I think understanding that adding a 17th game, like there's no amount of practice that you can take off or no amount of players that you can add to a roster that's going to make a 17th game neutral from how much intensity is kind of put on the guys' bodies before. And compared to what we have a game, so that I think certainly not a win for players to add a game. This is more work and more risk and more danger because there will be guys who in that 17th week will have some sort of injury that's going to impact the way that their careers go forward, and that to me is unfortunate. But again, you don't get these games without paying some price, and the price sometimes is a lockout or a strike. In this case, the price is adding an extra game.
Domonique, is it normal to have 500 players not vote on the CBA? Is that normal?
Well, the way we did it last time, we kind of had everyone involved. Everyone was in their team meeting rooms when we called them with our recommendation. And as executive committee, we had a unanimous recommendation. And then they kind of came back. All the teams voted unanimously to pass it with the exception of Ryan Clark and the Steelers. Those guys were being different, but they actually had a good reason because their issue was with commissioner discipline. They had issues with that, and we saw how that got out of hand going forward. So I think when you have anytime everyone's kind of disparately spread out throughout the country and it's their responsibility to log into a site and react to these things and vote, I think it's probably not unlikely. You look at the population that votes in American elections, I imagine that the population that voted in this election for the players is higher than would normally vote in a United States election. So I'm not surprised by it. And if you don't have the information and if you don't care, I'd rather you not vote than just kind of randomly toss a coin and pick one side.
You say the contracts are about to be bananas when the television money starts coming in. So Patrick Mahomes is going to get what?
A small country? I don't know. It's hard for me to project what Patrick Mahomes is going to get. It's going to be less than he deserves. I can tell you that. That tends to be the case with those big-time guys because the pressure that's put on them from the franchise tag and all this pressure that's being ginned up now about how star quarterbacks should take less money so they can build around him. Like, that pressure is real, and those guys feel it. So I think he'll get less than he deserves. And the fact that the salary cap is an artificial constraint. So whatever he gets is going to be less than he deserves, but it's going to be more than anybody else has ever gotten. Whenever he gets his second deal, assuming he's still as big as he is now, it's going to be mind-blowing. So it's hard for me to even estimate. But if we're looking at right now, the salary cap's at about $200 million, and quarterbacks are getting around $30 to $40 million. If it goes up to $400 million, then maybe you can expect those guys to get 60, 80 a year.
Domonique, what do you do? What advice would you give to Dak Prescott?
Go ahead and play out the franchise and keep doing what you've been doing. He's always stayed healthy and balled out. He'd play out the franchise tag, play it out another year, and then become a free agent. And he might, if he gets to that point, he'll have much more leverage than Kirk Cousins did when he was kind of the last real free agent quarterback. It just doesn't happen that often, and I can't imagine that Jerry Jones is going to let it happen there, but he's putting himself in a position where Dak is going to have all the leverage. While he doesn't have it now, he's going to have it. If he plays through this season on a franchise tag next year, if I were Dak, I would refuse any deal they offered unless it was mind-blowing and sign the franchise again and become a free agent, assuming that he stays healthy and continues to play.
Last question for Domonique Foxworth here with us on ESPN Radio. If the NFL players had taken your advice and decertified, what would have happened next in your mind? When you're giving that advice,
Right.
It is to eliminate the salary cap?
No, so decertification is a high-risk, high-reward strategy, and I think it's not even a strategy necessarily. I think that through the history of the union, there was not much progress made. They went on strike, and they tried different ways to create leverage. They decertified the union, and once they decertified the union, that removed antitrust protection from the league. And so the league essentially lost a lawsuit against the players, and the league required that the players reform the union, because once you form a union, you can have things like a draft, salary cap, trades, like all those things that don't exist in regular workplaces. So I think that the power of the union is actually more valuable to the leagues at this point than it is to the players. I think it is, again, it's high risk. There are several things that could go wrong, but I don't know how else you create any leverage. That's how we gained free agency in 92 was because the union was decertified and the league was no longer allowed to operate as a cartel. So it doesn't seem like the players have the appetite for anything like that, so I wouldn't recommend it if it's not something they want. But then you also can't complain about how you end up here because you're not going to have the leverage you want to get the things that you desire. And I'm not sure that they can do that because the money's too good for any one player or any group of players to walk away and endure any strike or protracted labor dispute.
Thank you for the insight, Domonique. Always good talking to you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
It was a very serious segment with Domonique.
Really
Yahoo sources are reporting, Chris Haynes is reporting, NBA and the Players Association have reached agreement during the coronavirus hiatus to eliminate drug testing, all drug testing. So we know what some of these players are going to be doing with their free time. Funniest thing from the sports weekend next.
If you missed any of the show, you can listen to all 3 hours of the Dan Le Batard Show, plus our Miami Only Hour and our Best of Podcast on demand in the ESPN app, and subscribe to the Le Batard and Friends Podcast Network featuring South Beach Sessions, Stupidity, and Mystery Crate. Please rate and subscribe. New episodes are posted every week, wherever you get your podcasts.
We are going to attempt to stay on schedule with all of the content that you're used to getting, South Beach Sessions, Stupidity, Mystery Crate. We will see if we can do that under trying circumstances. If you're just joining us, today has been an uncommon kind of bleep show because we're doing the show all scattered everywhere, where me and Mike are at my place, Stugotz is at his place, and the shipping container is on hold. And when we went to Chris Cody last time, it was a disaster. So I'm scared to go to him, but I'm going to do it in a second. I'm going to tell you, though, that in 10 minutes or so, 10 to 12 minutes, we're going to have on the New York Times reporter who wrote a story that offended a whole lot of folks because somebody is basically collecting all of the hand sanitizer in a region and then selling it to gouge. We're going to talk to that reporter in a second, but first, let's do funniest thing from the sports weekend. Do we actually have the imaging, or do we have any of our library, or am I just going straight to funniest thing from the sports weekend?
Hey, people, here's what made you laugh this weekend.
Chris, what was the funniest thing?
Hold on, we do have a sponsor. Funniest thing for the sports weekend is brought to you by Advance Auto Parts. Get a free battery test and free installation with any automotive battery purchase only at Advance Auto Parts. Think ahead, think advance.
I think I'm here for Mike attempting to do the impersonations of all the imaging instead of using our library of 20 years of sounds.
Oh, man. Weekend observations is going to be a challenge.
Chris, what was the funniest thing from the sports weekend?
WWE wrestlers trying to hype up an empty arena.
It was so good. It really was. Your phone line still stinks. Go to the ocean. Billy, what was the funniest thing from the sports weekend?
Rick Pitino is back.
It's so good. Stugotz, come on. It's unbelievable that he snuck in. Sports gets canceled. Everyone is running into their homes, and Pitino comes out because it's safe to come out. And next thing you know, he's the Iona coach, and SportsCenter can't even cover it because like half of the things are in reruns. Like
it's only safe for Pitino to come out. He's been dead for 1,000 years.
He's been undead for 1,000 years. Roy, what was the funniest thing from the sports weekend?
Nobody wants Tom Brady.
Yeah, that's you guys. Yeah. Why doesn't that sound better? Explain to me in 2020. This is not the virus's fault. I don't understand why we can't get a functioning phone line around here. Can someone explain to me why it is that the three of them had nothing but a sentence to offer there, and all three sentences sounded crappy? Mike, what was the funniest thing from the sports weekend?
Dan, in trying times like these, we try to hang on to any bit of normalcy that we can get, and for many in the New York area, that is Mike Francesa, who made a public declaration that he is prepared to broadcast from his basement if things get really wild. To which I say, we are also willing to broadcast from Mike Francesa's basement.
Be a dream.
Yes, well, Stugotz, this virus, the silver lining on this virus is that Stugotz doesn't have to make the drive in every day. I've heard toilets flushing. I've heard him in the background just dropping things, yelling at his dog.
I'm constantly riding the game because Dan is breathing as if he just climbed 10 flights of stairs, which is actually what he did because the elevator isn't working. Really a horrible time for an elevator to not work.
Yes, it's pretty bad.
Terrible. Yeah. I mean, this is glorious, Dan. I'm so close to a bathroom, I could do segments from the bathroom. You would have no idea. Great, I'm home.
Stugotz, what was the funniest thing from the sports weekend?
Michael Bisping, I think he's an announcer for UFC, and man, did I love the UFC over the weekend. I never loved the UFC so much than I did this past
Michael
weekend.
Bisping is a fighter, Stugotz.
He's a fighter.
He's a fighter? Anyway, he was telling an empty arena to make some noise for the winner.
Yes. Well, my funniest thing is that UFC just churns along without anyone interrupting it. Like, it is amazing to me. I understand how, I guess, in a totally antiseptic environment that professional wrestlers might be able, if they're being tested, to continue with the ridiculousness of laser light shows as they're being introduced to no crowd noise. But the idea that mixed martial arts is able to continue here, and that Dana White says that haunted, plagued, cursed fight of Khabib versus Ferguson, which hasn't been able to get off under any circumstances, can get that it's going to continue as normal, that we're going to get that fight. It's going to be the biggest thing in sports. But how is it? It can't be, right? It can't go off without a hitch. It's not going to go off.
If it goes off, there'll certainly be a hitch. This whole pandemic, but even during the fights that were in Brazil, they were promoting a fight that was supposed to take place in London, but there's a whole travel restriction. No one can get in and out of London. And while all this is happening, even Nevada says, hey, no fights in Nevada until this certain date, which would put in jeopardy the auxiliary campus that UFC was planning on hosting all these fights out of. But Dana White takes ESPN platforms and says, no, the fights are going to happen. Even if it's not in Nevada, we are going to find a place for fights. He's actually pretty unaffected by the coronavirus, all things considered, because, hey, I'm in the fight game. I put on fights. I run into hiccups and hurdles every week. So there are fights that need to be put on. I'm going to put on fights because I'm a fight promoter. And you know what? Dana White will find the places to put on the fights.
It is such a golden opportunity, Stugotz, for, weird to say, right, as America is scared, but mixed martial arts has for so many years, we've talked to Dana White about this for about a decade, okay? He signs his Fox deal that makes him legitimized after one of these reality show fights. And in the alley, he signs the deal because the fight is so good. And what ends up happening from there is he spends many years trying to get ESPN to endorse what it is that he's doing. ESPN doesn't really cover it. ESPN covers it from afar. And then the next thing you know, all of a sudden... What is happening?
That was a
back
toilet
there?
flush. That was a
That
toilet
was not
flush.
a
That was a
toilet
toilet flush.
Sorry.
The next thing you know, it's all over ESPN. We need programming desperately, and so now all the fights are all over ESPN, even old fights. You're watching,
Yep.
Cowboy and McGregor fight all of a sudden because ESPN needs the programming because we don't have any sports.
There is such a wide lane for any sports to occupy. We're desperate, and UFC for a weekend was there. We'll see what they can do the rest of the way to clear up some Michael Bisping confusion. He is a fighter, but he was on commentary for that set of fights. And I really do think that we'd be foolish to doubt Dana White at any point. As states close off to him, he will find he will do this in international waters, I think, because I think Dana White recognizes the opportunity. Now, I think Dana White does have a level of responsibility to test these fighters and make it well known because, like I said earlier in the show, I do think that we're willing to give combat sports a sort of wider lane than we are to the traditional.
A wider ethical lane because it's barbaric?
Yeah, because we check a lot of our moralities at the door when it's two guys strapped into a cage and duking it out. But I do think that he has to have some level of responsibility to at least get the messaging out there that just for the safety of the fighters and those around them that they're getting tested aggressively.
All right, so coming up next, we've got the New York Times reporter who a lot of people got really mad reading this story because you're seeing the worst in people as they fight in grocery stores and you're elbowing somebody in the neck over toilet paper. This person, the reporter's going to join us and talk about, just was collecting hand sanitizer in a way that was greedy and unctuous. We will talk to him next.
ESPN Radio is presented by Progressive Insurance. Jack Nicas going to join us from the New York Times reporter. He'll join us in just a second on the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line. Here's your SportsCenter update. The Titans have agreed on a 4-year deal with Ryan Tannehill that will pay him up to $118 million, $62 million of which is fully guaranteed. Patriot safety Devin McCourty agreed to a 2-year deal with the Patriots worth $23 million. His twin brother Jason had his team option picked up by the team last week. And finally, we know Listerine for keeping our mouths minty fresh. But it has been sold as a surgical disinfect, a cure for dandruff, a floor cleaner, a hair tonic, a deodorant, and as a beneficial remedy for diseases ranging from diphtheria and dysentery, Jesus, Mike, to smallpox and gonorrhea.
Dysentery.
Whatever. It's Listerine. Makes my mouth minty fresh. Take advantage of Casper's end-of-season clearance sale with savings up to 20%. Get the mattress of your dreams at Casper.com now through March 23rd.
Your mouth is never minty fresh. Your mouth tastes like dysentery.
That's a good, fair point.
Minty fresh. Maybe menthol fresh.
Have you ever, you put Listerine in your mouth and gargle it for 30 seconds, your eyes start to water. I feel like they're going to come out of my head. I mean... Anyway, see Casper.com/terms.
So we're doing an uneven show today, and we thank you for your patience. You've actually been very nice to us because you understand. Yes, because they understand that we're doing this under difficult circumstances. But Jack Nicas is a New York Times reporter. And before I get to the meat of what his story was, Jack, thank you for joining us. Can you please tell us whether or not you've had a story ever in your career that has gotten the reaction that this one's gotten?
No, I've been a journalist for 12, 13 years, and this story by far got the most intense reaction of my career.
So tell the people, for those who don't know, exactly what it is that you were reporting, and I've got some follow-up questions about the how and why you decided to report it.
Sure. So basically, probably many of your listeners saw this story because it went so insanely viral this weekend, but I wrote about two brothers, Matt and Noah Colvin, in Tennessee, who, when they realized the panic over the coronavirus in early March, they went out on a 1,300-mile road trip and filled a U-Haul truck with thousands of bottles of hand sanitizer and thousands of packs of antibacterial wipes across Tennessee and Kentucky. And Matt Colvin also ordered pallets of even more wipes and sanitizers to his home, and then they started selling these sanitizer and wipes for significant markups on Amazon. Some of the hand sanitizer bottles were going for between $8 and $70 each. And then Amazon pulled his items, his listings, and a bunch of other Amazon sellers' listings, and basically suspended some of them and warned many of the others that if they kept price gouging, they'd be kicked off the platform. That, as a result, when I wrote about him, on Saturday, basically while millions of people around the world were searching in vain for hand sanitizer, Mr. Colvin, he was sitting on 17,700 bottles of hand sanitizer, and he didn't really know where he was going to sell them. And so that story alone set off basically national outrage over this situation.
So explain to me how this story landed with you and why it is that they were so willing to share it with you? They must not have thought they were doing anything wrong. They just thought they were partaking in capitalism.
Indeed, they were. But I'll go back to, I cover Silicon Valley for the New York Times. I'm based in San Francisco. And when a story like this, like the coronavirus happens, you want to look for interesting angles. It's usually that intersects with your beat. And so, given that I cover Silicon Valley and technology, I realized that price gouging on Amazon and eBay was becoming a serious issue. But I wanted to tell the human story of that. So I started looking for the people who were actually doing the price gouging. And so I found a bunch of them in a Facebook group that was basically called Amazon Sellers Dealing with Coronavirus Issues. And I just started messaging a bunch of them and talked to, I think 9 of them, and just heard their stories and kept looking for the best story. And eventually I came upon Matt Colvin. And he was willing to talk on the record in part because he felt like Amazon had done him wrong, and actually had done the public wrong, because he was sitting on all this hand sanitizer and trying to distribute it. He wanted to sell it, and Amazon was not letting him, basically. Who was the second best gouger that you found? Well, we also quote a guy named Chris Anderson in the story, who is these people are basically full-time Amazon sellers. They do what's called retail arbitrage. They basically go around to Walmart, Lowe's. They look for hard-to-find items, discounted items, like limited-run cereals, hot toys, anything like that, anything that they can sell for a markup on Amazon. So these people are professionals. This is what they do. And I think that's in part why they were blinded by the reaction, because this is what they do every day in and day out. This guy went around and bought about 10,000 face masks, the N95 masks that the doctors are wearing. And he said he used coupons to buy packs of 10s of these masks for around $15 each, and he was reselling them for $40 to $50. He made a $25,000 profit. I spoke to another guy, Eric, who was a truck driver in Ohio. He also made a bunch of stops at stores around his state, collected about 10,000 masks. He bought the masks for about 10 packs for $20 each, and he was selling most of them for $80 each, and some of them for $125 each. The quote I put in the story from him was, even at $125 a box, they were selling almost instantly, he said. Quote, it was mind-blowing as far as what you could charge. And he estimates he made about $35,000 to $40,000 profit off that.
Jack Nicas with us, New York Times reporter. So explain to me how and where this goes from these guys just doing business to these guys partaking in a crime.
Sure. So after we published our story, it went insanely viral. It rocketed across the internet. I can't share internal metrics, but the readership was pretty insane for NewYorkTimes.com. It got syndicated across Yahoo, et cetera. These guys Matt Colvin became an infamous celebrity almost instantly. And within hours, investigators from the Tennessee Attorney General's office were at his house asking him about this. But before that had even happened, I was still messaging with him, and he told me basically, really disgraceful stuff. He was getting death threats, people sending pizzas to his door, really terrible stuff, people telling him that him and his wife and his children should be killed, all really horrible stuff. And obviously, regardless of what you think of his actions, that's really disgraceful. But what happened was he told me, I just don't want to deal with this. I want to donate it at this point. So he was searching for donations. I got a deluge of people reaching out to me about wanting to get access to it or buy it. I connected him with some people, but he basically ended up going with a local church in his community. So that happened on Sunday morning. Essentially, he gave 2/3 of his stockpile to a local church who's going to distribute it to first responders and other people in need in Tennessee. The other third, the Tennessee Attorney General office took, and they're going to give it to Kentucky because he bought some of the hand sanitizer there. But he's now facing an investigation from the Tennessee Attorney General's office, and they have a price gouging law that kicks in when the governor declares an emergency, which he has. And then under that law, it would be $1,000 per violation of the law.
And so how many violations would they be guilty of?
Well, that's going to be up to a legal case here, but he says he sold 300 bottles before Amazon kicked him off, so that's $300,000 potentially. There is actually potentially some good news in the language of the law, and that is the law only kicks in after the governor declares an emergency. The governor declared an emergency on Thursday of last week. he bought and sold virtually all the stuff before that. So nevertheless, a spokeswoman for the Attorney General's office said that they would still seek any penalties they could under the consumer protection laws in the state.
I know you aspire to objectivity, but just in saying that he was getting some vile stuff, do you feel bad for him, for his ignorance?
Oh, man. Listen, we journalists are humans, and we absolutely aspire for objectivity. And if you read my original story, we didn't pull any punches, but at the same time, we just tried to really write the facts and let people judge for themselves as they did. At the same time, I told a friend today, I said, I just wish the hatred on these price gougers were more evenly distributed across all the price gougers across the nation, because it wasn't just this one guy, but he seems to be bearing the brunt of it. I do feel like people, literally someone went to his house on Saturday night, was banging on his door. And that's just, I think people need to, two wrongs don't make a right here. And so I do feel bad for the guy, for the reaction he's got. At the same time, I think he now understands that his actions were clearly unacceptable.
Why wasn't there regulation on the front end from Amazon?
This is a good question, and we're continuing to see price gouging happen. I mean, this is the story of the internet of the past decade. I mean, all of these platforms, we saw misinformation on Facebook. We see really vile stuff on YouTube. We see Amazon. I posted on Twitter as part of my thread here. Amazon was selling a 4-pack of toilet paper for $75, and this was Amazon itself. A lot of this stuff is algorithmically generated, and there's not proper controls to stop this stuff. And a lot of their actions are retroactive. They oftentimes don't act until the press points it out or consumers point it out. And it's in part because their platforms are so enormous. This stuff is so complicated, and because their business models are designed for enormous growth and therefore they want to create less friction to allow people to sell, to allow people to post, to allow people to put up videos, all that sort of stuff. So this is unfortunately the story of the internet, and we're probably going to see more of this sort of price gouging as this ordeal plays out for us.
Super illuminating. Jack Nicas, New York Times reporter, with us on ESPN Radio. Stugotz, what do you have for him?
Jack, where do you think Brady's going?
I am from Worcester, Massachusetts, and I am praying to the football gods that he is coming back home.
All right. I went to Clark University on the bad side of town. You know what I'm saying?
There you go.
Jack, thank you for being on with us. We appreciate the reporting.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Anytime.
Today on ESPN Daily, with so much unclear, one thing is decided. The NFL has a new collective bargaining agreement. More on the details, plus how the league could alter plans in 2020. That's ESPN Daily with Mina Kimes, presented by ADT. Download, subscribe, and review ESPN Daily wherever you enjoy your podcast.
So the audience very often can be cruel in times of vulnerability, and when we are terrible, sometimes people let us know it. I salute you, America, for being slightly less mean today than you normally are, even though we have been a good deal crappier than we normally are because of extenuating circumstances. You guys seem to be applying some perspective, some nuance. You're okay with the idea that we're doing a bad show as long as we're doing a show, because it feels somewhat normal to you, even though Stugotz is at his house flushing his toilet with Finnegan barking, and I'm here sweating and breathless running up and down stairs in my apartment with Mike here, and the shipping container is like just listening to the show on hold. Every once in a while they get called upon and their phone lines don't work. Stugotz is seeing a whole lot of positive silver linings around sports here. We have been a super sportsy show today. Odd that at a time when there are no sports, we would do our sportsiest show in about a decade. But you love legal tampering, and you love that the NBA playoffs might be over the summer. You're seeing all the positives in this.
Yes, I mean, listen, this is my time, Dan. When you tell me I can legally tamper with something, I mean, that's in my wheelhouse. So listen, I know a lot of people are criticizing, and I know you're listening, but I know a lot of people are criticizing the NFL.
You told me to listen twice. You haven't said anything yet.
I know a lot of people. I said I love when people can legally tell me to tamper. I mean, that is a good time for me. But a lot of people are criticizing the NFL here, and I want to take a second and thank the NFL, because I know that some of this might seem unseemly, and I know a lot of us are having a tough time right now.
You're a spokesman
but
for
what the hell
unseemly.
would we be doing if the NFL wasn't doing what they're doing? So thank you, Roger Goodell, and thank you, NFL, for not caring about us and thundering forward with the NFL season. I love it.
The NBA playoffs this summer, that's something that you're here for?
Yeah, because it's so fascinating for this reason. Now, I know Rich Kleiman, the agent for Kevin Durant, came on, and he said that Kevin Durant, it's unlikely that he would come back over the summer if they played the postseason. But he didn't close the door, Dan, okay? He said it's unlikely, but he didn't say it's not happening. And I think the longer this thing stretches out, and we get to a summer NBA playoff, which, by the way, I think is a good idea regardless, because you're going up against only baseball. We're all starving for anything in the summer in terms of sports, and the NBA playoff being played during the summer, throughout the summer, is something that I'd find fascinating and wonder if the rest of the country, if sports fans across the country would feel the same way. But I do love the idea of the Nets being a 7 seed. I think they'd play the Celtics in the first round, the Celtics having to deal with Kevin Durant. That would be funny, man.
We are all, everyone who is quarantined is watching a whole lot of bad television. And I enjoyed on Twitter, Stugotz, this is something funny, right? That Joe Prano on Twitter, he got trapped in Carson Palmer, A Football Life. And so he's watching Carson Palmer.
That's actually a good one. That's a good one.
Is it a good one?
Yeah, Sue's watched it.
Okay, but I love the point that he made, though, because A Football Life can be very gentle with its mythologizing. And so Joe Prano is sitting there watching this and saying to himself, how are they going to handle the 6 turnover game? How are they going to handle the 6 turnover game? And the way that A Football Life glossed over it was just by saying it wasn't meant to be.